On one weekend in August, 5 members of the Manson family slaughtered the occupants of 2 houses in Los Angeles. In Hollywood, they left behind 5 dead bodies, including the actress Sharon Tate. On the second night, they left a fork planted in the chest of one of their victims.
Well, the crimes were very bizarre. Usually in a mass murder, some person of rather low intellect flips out and murders 10 or 12 or 15 people. Here, when the murders first took place, they called them the Tate murders. Everyone called them the Tate murders because of Sharon Tate. Then Manson appears on the scene, and he's so, whatever the word, charismatic, unusual, colorful, that he upstaged the victims. It became the Manson case. I mean, here you have this little guru, 5 feet 2 inches tall, gathers around him a young bunch of kids from average American families. You'd never expect them to be mass murderers. Convinces them that he's a second coming of Christ and the devil. Ultimately gets them to kill total strangers for him at his command. I mean, if you look at everything in the amalgam, this is an extremely bizarre, strange case.
One thing that you will hardly ever see is the murder of an 8.5-month pregnant woman. And not only was Sharon Tate stabbed, but while she was still alive, she was hung from the rafters in her living room. That's something that you can never get over. That's one of the worst things I've seen as a prosecutor.
I would describe Manson as an instrument of the evil supernatural. The crimes are just sort of the fruit of the tree. The crimes are just the part you can see. And they're not the most, although they're the most tragic consequences interpersonally, they're not the most, what do you say, the most threatening part of the situation. The most threatening part is what causes that, you know, the destruction. And what we saw was the destruction. But that's not as important as what caused it.
Manson and 23 followers, mostly women, were arrested in Death Valley, one of the remotest parts of the United States. Manson had taken over a small ranch house, and to the outside world, his family looked just like hippies.
The historians in the United States, a lot of them do attribute the demise of the generation of the 60s to the Tate LaBianca murders and the Manson family, and certainly the hippies got terrible publicity from Manson and the family, and I think it did hasten their demise. Before, they were kind of just druggies, free spirit, throwing flowers around, taking their clothes off, free sex and stuff like that. But then after the Tate LaBianca murders, people became genuinely afraid of hippies, which was misguided, but that happened.
I told you, and I'll tell you again, I did not break the law. I can do anything I want and never break the law. I did not break the law. Is it registered? It's the same thing Jesus Christ told Pilate, man. He said, you're blaming me for your problems. You're trying to put the blame over on me, and it doesn't fit. I'm not Richard Milhouse Nixon. I'm Charles Milles Manson.
To those in power, to the parents of the 60s generation, it seemed by 1969 that America was at war with itself. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll were frequently accompanied by political protest.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Rioting students, violent confrontations with the police, and the endless public protests against the war in Vietnam were all giving the 60s a bad name.
It's as if there was an expectation of an apocalypse and a series of dress rehearsals for it. There was a sense of doom in the air, and a good deal of that had to do with the Vietnam War, the polarization in the country over the Vietnam War and over drugs and the drug culture. Overall, there was a sense of anticipation, almost a hunger for an end. And the culture was full of intimations of endings.
At the trial, it was revealed that one of the victims had the word war carved on his stomach.
Leslie said, yeah, I killed her. And they said, why did you kill her? I said, I killed her to stop the war. Said, what did you think about when you killed her? I said, well, I said, at least you won't be sending your kids to war. Why don't we do it in the road? And then all these kids are out here doing it in the road, you dig? And then you're singing all that stuff and saying, well, it's all Charlie's fault. Hey, man, I didn't write the songs. That's not my generation. My generation's Bing Crosby, man. I'm not generation of the Beatles.
The authorities looked for the reasons behind the protests. Communism, drugs, rock musicians, and university lecturers were all held accountable.
They didn't want to face the fact that their products, their children, the children of the system, would do this. They didn't want to hear our reasons, which was really an expression of why the young were totally I wouldn't even use the word satisfied. We were alienated from our culture. So then you have an ex-con with no education. Who would be better to blame for the behavior of America's own children? So even though during the trials, the defendants, the female defendants, were very willing and capable of saying why they killed the people that were killed. Each woman had her reason for doing what they did. Say if I had been there in body, then my emphasis would have been maybe different. They didn't want to hear it. They made Manson the culprit, the bad guy, the demonic manipulator of these poor middle class, upper middle class children. They said that he wanted power and that he wanted to be a star in music, which is such baloney.
Thousands of demonstrators opposed to the Vietnam War assembled in the nation's capital for a mass protest.
In the summer of '69, men landed on the moon. A week later were the Manson murders, and a week later was Woodstock. And then, in that November of '69, was the biggest anti-war demonstration that had ever happened in the United States. Now, I'm sure there was violence at that demonstration. It was cops beating demonstrators. Then the U.S., I think the following year, under Nixon, U.S. invaded Cambodia. I think 250,000 Cambodian people were killed. There was a humongous demonstration in Washington, where again, demonstrators really got beat up. But there was also escalating violence within the movement. The way that I understand it is that we kept demonstrating against the war. We kept trying to end the war in Vietnam, and it didn't end.
A second wave of MPs with fixed bayonets in scabbards move into position.
When I had a radio show in San Francisco, and it was about the time that the Milles massacre occurred, and I compared Lieutenant Calley to Charles Manson, and the soldiers under Calley to the family under Manson. It was similar because they both had to do with brainwashing. You know, these were American boys who were turned into killers. And the same thing happened with the Manson family. They were conned by Manson into his value system and became killers. Manson was kind of an individualized version of the state, but they both had their hierarchy and they both had the following orders. So I think the Nuremberg trial would apply equally to the Manson family and the soldiers in the Milles Massacre.
In Los Angeles today, Charles Manson has been found guilty of first-degree murder in the 7 Tate LaBianca killings.
Every day during the trial, Sandra Good and other members of the family sat outside the court. This is where they heard that Manson and their friends had been sentenced to death.
1944, I went into a judge that was the same judge that was in Nuremberg, that was hanging Waffen soldiers over there in the war. I stayed in the judge's robes under Dr. Hartman. I'm like his little boy. He raised me all my life. Everything I know, I got inside. I don't have any parents. I don't have mothers and fathers and family unit like you guys do, you dig? I live in prison. I was raised inside the judge's body. I'm in the judge's robe.
You've all judged yourselves poorly.
Are you guys proud of a system where a man cannot defend himself? Are you proud of it?
That was an 8-month trial with many witnesses. What are you going to do now?
That was a trial, 8 months of prosecution testimony. They've convicted these people, and you are next, all of you.
What are you going to do now?
Listen to me. There are many more men who are experiencing the same injustice. There's a revolution coming very soon.
Manson, 35 in 1969, had already spent over 17 years, half of his life, locked up. He had been out of prison 2.5 years when the Tate murders were committed.
How do you go, Charlie? You know what they're doing to your Constitution? What's that? What are they doing? They're making a joke out of your Constitution. Love's not in your courtroom, and God is not in your heart. What happens there today? They do what they want.
Charles Manson had been released from Terminal Island Prison in March 1967 and headed straight for Haight-Ashbury, the hippie mecca in San Francisco. This is where the Manson family began. He rented a house, played his guitar, and seemed to be just another one of the Love Generation's dropouts.
When Manson came here, it was probably the kind of scene he would enjoy very much. A lot of available women, a lot of drug traffic, a lot of psychic energy. Everybody was using drugs every day and walking down the street stoned out of their heads or having bad trips. And it was an environment I think he might have enjoyed. It was kind of hellish. It was something like Hieronymus Bosch might have enjoyed painting if he were alive in those times. There were so many freaks and so many extremes. But the good people, the original people had left. They were gone. So all you had here was these biker gangs, speed freaks, and these innocent young people who came looking for the promise of peace and love and got exploited by these kind of characters.
Peace and love, the 60s, flower children, da-da-da-da. That's the kind of thing that would give him an entree into the most vulnerable market. See, if he'd have thought he could control some other group, he would have got their nomenclature down and went there. But this was the most vulnerable. It was obviously the most vulnerable because it was